So I'm always going to look at it because there's new ways of thinking, there's new technologies, there's new information that comes, and we want to be able to adjust and iterate on that.
My name is Matt Reiner, managing partner at Capital Investment Advisors, CEO of Wellness Strategies, an author, podcast host, and also a speaker to the wealth management community. My mission is to help every family in this country have access and be served by a human financial advisor. That we all have to live in the moment and not try to force progress too quickly. Let it happen and commit to a long-term strategy in your life, in your business, and in your investment portfolio.
And now, your host and my dad, Matt Reiner.
Patrick Parker, Fynancial. How you doing, my friend? How are you?
Doing great. How's it going, Matt?
It's going great, man. Super happy to have you. I've been following y'all's progress for a long time. I think that the business y'all are building is, at least from an outsider's, gaining traction, starting to make an impact. And, I've been following it for a while and just been super impressed with you and the vision that y'all have. And so I just am so grateful to have you on the podcast and really just talk about, your journey to get to where you are, the problem that y'all are solving, why y'all saw that as a problem. And I think that we'll naturally start talking about from a tech side, because we both are tech enthusiasts, about AI as a whole as well. But I want to gradually get there. And I want to really start, I always think it's interesting to talk about people that move into being an entrepreneur, that go into entrepreneurship. What was that moment that led you to take that leap into something unknown?
Yeah, so I'd been around technology my whole life. The pivotal moment probably was birth. Honestly, I just have always known that I wanted to start a business, and luckily my father owns an RIA within Tennessee. It's one of the larger privately held firms, and so I just kind of grew up around the hustle and just understanding how to build a business from a very young age. So I had a lot of opportunities that probably a lot of other people didn't, but I, like many people, graduated college, about halfway through, decided it was tech or nothing. Probably the black sheep of the family for not going into the family business, right, and becoming a wealth manager myself. So long story short, I went into Big Four consulting, did that for about 10, 12 years. I was working with a lot of different Fortune 500 companies, a lot of public sector, local and state governments, and the problems were the same, right? Just trying to figure out how we can better use technology to better serve our clients, whether that is end investors, whether that is the public, et cetera. And long story short, I just saw an opportunity to kind of take a step back, analyze kind of what was happening with software and the way that it was going. Long story short, the end users just weren't happy. And so that kind of led me down the path of human-centered design, which involves kind of incorporating those end users up front from the very beginning, just, from a requirements gathering perspective, to ensure that you're taking them along that journey with you to where they actually understand exactly how the platform works. You're building it into the workflows that they have now, and you're actually able to achieve kind of those end results that they're looking for, why they brought you in the first place.
The user-centered journey aspect is super interesting. That's like a lesson I think that not many advisors necessarily think about. I mean, I think that they talk about it, right? The client, always think about the client first, but coming from the technological world where you're solving from a big consulting and you're going and solving problems to learn that lesson, what first off, maybe explain what that is and how do you solve problems with that in mind? And if I can make this a really loaded question, why not? Like, how can advisors use that information to evolve their practice? How can advisors be leveraging user-centered methodologies and ideology to better their practice and better the client experience that they have for their families?
Yeah, so human-centered design is really just a framework, right? And it focuses around the people that are supposed to be getting benefits from the service that you're providing, right? And so I'll relate that back to wealth management in a minute, but essentially what you do is you want to find the people that are going to be the best users of that product and the ones that stand to gain the most. You want to get their buy-in very early on in the process so that they feel included and involved throughout every step. There's never a question around, is this going to work for me? It's more of how quick can I get it into my hands to solve the problems that I'm intending to solve. And so when you look at that from a wealth management perspective, you kind of take a step back and you probably have an ideal client in mind, someone that you prefer to work with, someone that has kind of helped you evolve your business over time. And it's the same exact principles that apply here. So having the opportunity to kind of see what is working well and following that journey along with the data all the way to the very end to understand how can I replicate this process. And then it's just a matter of kind of building that for scale so that you can give the best experience to every single client and not just on an individual basis, right? So it's really focused around repetition and how can I create those repeatable results over and over again.
Yeah, and speaking, I think that kind of leads us really well into, Financial, right? The platform that you build and the product that y'all have been building, because it mixes, technology, at least from an outsider, how I see it, right? It mixes technology, social engagement, and wealth management together, right? These different elements, and I'm curious, from your perspective of the belief of why community and conversation are really the next major leap or the next big thing that's necessary for this industry. Because I mean, you put the user at the center forefront, which is the end client. You built this product with them in mind. You also had a user of the advisor and put them in the forefront and tried to blend it. And why is such a belief with regards to community and conversation as the big need in our industry today?
Yeah. So if you think about Fynancial, our goal there was to build a bridge, right? How can we best use technology to facilitate communication? Because at the end of the day, that's what matters most. Everything, whether it's you're trying to convert a new client, you're trying to generate leads, everything starts with a conversation. And so going back, most client portals that existed at the time that we were starting Fynancial, they were kind of slapped on at the end, right? It was an afterthought. It was, okay, we have this great planning or portfolio tool. What can we show to our clients to showcase the value and the reason that we have this, right? What can we use to kind of guide decision making and help them visually understand what's going on, what progress they're making, and ultimately how their plan is performing, right? And so if we take a step back and look at some of the analytics for those platforms and the underutilization, you'll see very quickly that most of those platforms were only seeing around 6% utilization, which is very, very, very low. And so the reason for that, number one, they weren't mobile, most of them, which is just now how people prefer to interact with technology. So you're picking up your phone 96 times a day. Most people are on their phone for an average of 5.5 hours a day. If I showed you my screen time, you'd probably laugh. I'm personally embarrassed about it. But again, the entire world went mobile. And so we also had this issue where you had multiple logins for a number of different types of technology. So I'd go one place to look at my plan. I'd go to another place to look at my performance. I'd go to another place to upload documents, sign documents, etc. And so it was very fragmented and just disconnected. In other words, it was very difficult for your end investor, your client, to follow along that process and to know where to navigate for what. And so what we did is we integrated with all of those tools and we created a unified layer on top to where instead of having to go to all those places, you can just now open your app, right? You can click on your planning, you can click on your performance, you can single sign on right through. So no more logins, right? And then the other thing that we noticed is that most of them had an average bounce rate of about 6 seconds. So kind of diving back into the data, being the techie that I am, what does that give you time to do? It basically gives you the opportunity to open the app, say, am I okay, based on the high level numbers, and then set it down. And that was the only engagement that was there. The other challenge was the existing portals were largely just a broadcast system. They're largely charts and graphs or one-way kind of, it was a single direction communication. So bringing in things like direct messaging, bringing in things like a news feed that people were used to from social media. And the reason that we did that is because social media caught fire back in the early 2000s. But if you look at the fastest growing adopters, it's the older demographics. So they're already accustomed to using things like Facebook and like Instagram to keep up with grandkids, to keep up with kids and everything that's going on. And you take that a step further and you kind of say, they're also using mobile banking. So it was right in line with kind of the experience that people were expecting and the experience that people wanted. So it was really easy to kind of bridge the gap by consolidating all the technology, making the advisor's voice available directly within the pocket behind the push notification, and then just also understanding the preferred communication channels that people like to actually receive communication.
I love that idea. I think that the problem that I hear is, and I think y'all nailed it, is that portals were like a big thing. Like, hey, we have a portal, but nobody was using them. So then, what's the point of it? It doesn't become a sales tactic because there's no value to the end client. But now that technology, and this is kind of leading into like the AI world, but then now that technology is becoming more and more prevalent in our lives and in the way that we work and the way that we engage personally, I think that there's this fear of like losing personal touch. So how do you keep personal touch in a tech forward or tech first world of today?
Yeah, great question. I think first of all, it's just being accessible, right? And that's something that right now I've got to go through email, right? Previously, before financial. So that was a big challenge, right? At the end of the day, you spend 8, 9 hours a day working. The last thing you want to do is go combing through your personal email to find something from your advisor, right? So being able to deliver stuff via push notification is a great way to just get eyes on, whether that's content, whether that's an opportunity, whether that's a product that may be a good fit for them, whether that's a check-in, et cetera. There's so many different opportunities to engage with the client and actually provide a personalized service. But it all starts with that conversation like we were talking about earlier.
Yeah. So as we transition, I'm curious, let's just dive deep into it with AI. I mean, what does AI, in your opinion, mean for our industry?
So many things. A lot of it is just outside of just the personalization, things that you could not achieve or even fathom, 3 years ago, right? It's moving at a breakneck pace. Everyone's trying to understand what that looks like. There's a lot of fear initially of AI is going to replace advisors, right? I saw an article last week talking about a Microsoft executive came in and said, yeah, AI is going to replace all the advisors. It's going to change wealth management on its face. And it's like, that's just simply not true. At the end of the day, people crave that human connection. And so do I want to go through a chatbot that's trying to provide me with advice, or do I want to be able to pick up the phone and get a hold of someone that's ultimately accountable, right? I want someone that understands that I'm a person, right? I'm not a machine. They understand my unique situation. They understand my goals, my dreams, my aspirations. They understand the things that I'm scared about in terms of protecting my legacy or my family. And there's just not that level of empathy right now that we're seeing with artificial intelligence, even though people are starting to talk to it and have conversations with it like it's a real person. I think the biggest kind of benefits that we see, and there's so many just amazing tools out there right now that are already, picking up a lot of the heavy lifting. You look at kind of what Jump has done from a meeting note taker perspective. Parker and those guys did an absolutely phenomenal job, but they basically picked up one of the highest ROI use cases and went really hard and fast at it. Right. And so if you think about the workflows of advisors, you're looking at 30-ish% of their time that's spent in or on meetings, recapping meetings, providing summaries, extracting notes, and all those other things. And they largely automated that process. And so as you continue going downstream and looking at the other opportunities, whether that is from a data orchestration or workflow perspective, whether that is generating insights based on the data that you're seeing from either a team or firm level, being able to quickly act on that stuff. And that's kind of one of the opportunities that we saw with Fynancial as well, is because we were already sitting on top of all the client data, right? We're pulling in your planning, we're pulling in your performance, your CRM. It was really easy for us to add AI on top and then ultimately to re-architect our platform as an AI native platform so that we could do things like extract tags for personalization, so that we could understand and just, for example, review the direct messages that are happening and see what's going on today. So taking a lot of the workload off of advisors and putting that more in the background to where ultimately I think the end state is advisors are spending more time than ever with clients, right? And that's a net positive for everyone.
Are advisors missing something when they think about AI? Because I tend to believe that they're looking for the tool without the foundation. And what I mean by that is that they're looking for the tools and they're not getting the value because they haven't built the foundation. And I think that there's a missing point of all of this because of the flash and the fun of the tools themselves of like they're only as good as your data. And if you have segmented data in all these different sources and you're using 20 different technologies and you don't have all the data together, like the power of AI is going to be limited and it may not reach your benchmark of ROI, which then says like shouldn't as opposed to AI being the first focus, isn't data the first focus that needs to happen for advisors of understanding their data, structuring their data, creating the processes to ensure that the data is consistent across the system so that then they can get to the power of AI from that standpoint.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll probably give you a little more technical answer on this than you want. But so there's something you may have heard of that you're probably familiar with is a context window. A context window, if you think about a standard word, right, that's going to be something called tokenization. It's going to be about 3 to 4 tokens, right? And if you go through like the existing ChatGPT 5 that's out now on the enterprise version, the context window, I think, is somewhere between 192 to 196,000 tokens, right? And so I'll translate that at, what is it? At 192,000 tokens, it's approximately 500 pages of data. So think about your traditional financial plan, right? If you wanted to analyze financial plans across your entire book of business, it's just something that you can't do today, right? It's not going to ingest all of that. And when I say it's 192,000, a large portion of that is going to be input, but the other piece of that is output, right? We're talking about a total call. So when you actually bring in the data, it's going to get to a point where it just stops ingesting context. And then that's the point in time where it starts hallucinating. So it's going to use whatever inference it can to kind of make up or fill in the gap, so to speak, around what it thinks you're trying to achieve. And so there's a concept out there called chunking, and this goes back to the data, and this is why it's extremely important. So if you think about your traditional data warehouse, right? Let's go back to the example of a financial plan. Let's say you have a 50-page financial plan, and it's covering everything from retirement, insurance, legacy planning, college funding for kids, et cetera. Being able to, instead of feeding in all of the data across, being able to actually take chunks of that data so that you can look at a larger subset. And so you basically have your things like your data warehouses like Snowflake and Redshift and BigQuery and some of the other high vector or high dimensional vector databases to where you can chunk out and just look at, okay, I want to look at just the retirement planning section across all of my clients, right? So again, even with that, the existing context window sizes, that's basically good enough for team level kind of analysis. Through the APIs, it's a little bit higher to where they have around 400,000 as the context window. And this is ChatGPT I'm still talking about. So you can look at that. If you have a practice with, let's say, around 750 households, you can ingest all of those, right? But beyond that, you have to literally chunk out every single piece of data so that you can extract the insights. And this is kind of brings up another point where ChatGPT is what everyone uses now, but there's a lot of other LLMs out there that don't have the same constraints or limitations in terms of a context window. So if you look at things like Anthropic's Claude, or if you look at Google's Gemini, where they have a context window of 1 million, it's a lot more data that they're able to ingest, analyze, and then ultimately generate insights from. And so having your data just solidified as a foundation is essential with this. If you have garbage data in, we always say garbage data out. It's the same thing. So I think a lot of the emphasis, a lot of the kind of driving conversations that we'll see here in the near term future are how do I, first of all, break down these data silos? How do I get control of my data? And then how can I start creating those subsets that I was talking about, or those chunks that I'm talking about, to actually generate meaningful insights at scale?
Yeah, I think that that's, it's a super interesting point, and I think that that's a takeaway for that I believe advisors are facing on the AI side is that they, they're they're not finding the efficiency because of the difficulty to go gather the data to get the efficiency. And so they're like, oh, this is cool, but like, how am I going to scale this? And they can't scale it, which then I think brings back up the idea of data warehousing, where you can take all the data and put it on one line per family or per client, and then you can digest that and ingest that as well. And I think context windows will continue to grow up. And I think to your point that AI then also lives behind the scenes a little bit more. But I'm also curious of this kind of is a two-part question. I'll start with just one part though. You look at Michael Kitcey's landscape map, technology landscape map. I mean, you need a magnifying glass now to look at the damn thing. And so, I mean, and you don't even know how to apply it. Like you're like, all right, I see all these technologies. I can go to this one section. Now now I go from 7,000. I'm joking a little bit, but down to like 30 solutions. And now I have to go analyze 30 solutions. And you know, but a lot of the solutions on there, I just feel, and I'm wondering in your opinion, does AI replace and reduce that size of that landscape map over time?
100%. And a lot of that has to do with the tooling that's available just from an AI coding perspective as well. You look at a lot of the tools that, it's really shifted from engineering as kind of the sole practice to what we're seeing across our team even is they're being able to use the tools. They transition more to an architect, right, or a reviewer. So being able to rapidly prototype new feature sets, new functionality, new capabilities, and bring those things in app is really going to consolidate the number of different subscriptions you need, which there's something else that we should probably touch on in a bit, which is agentic AI and kind of what its role is as well in this overall landscape. But what we're seeing on our side, for example, it's like you used to have tools that were dedicated, right? So now if you look at just the way that CRMs are changing, most of the CRMs that we talk to, they're either integrated with or they're launching their own AI note takers, right? So how can we take more unstructured data, ingest that, and then generate insights on it? And so even the things that we're doing within Fynancial as well, we're able to iterate and innovate at a very, very fast clip that just wasn't possible a few years ago. The releases and the new capabilities that we see coming out every day are just, I mean, they're mind-bending, but it truly kind of changes your entire strategy in terms of how you deliver and build product. So I think you're right. I mean, I think we'll continue to see a ton of new companies pop up every single year. I mean, we're seeing that just, I think it's like plus 500 over the last couple of years, at least since we made the Kitcey's map back in 2022. And so I don't expect that to slow down anytime soon. I think people will continue to find new ways to solve problems and to create value. But at this point in time, there's nothing to keep a big industry player from turning around and building the same thing very quickly as well, right? So a lot of the moats that used to exist, they evaporated.
And will as many tools be necessary to run a practice efficiently as is deemed now, where you have such specialization on that side? I think about you're talking about like the power of AI, and I want to move into agentic here in a second as well. Here's how I've thought about this with AI, right? If AI continue and nothing moves linearly in this world, I get that. But if it did move linearly, if AI continues to move at the pace that it is moving over the next 3 years, AI would be at a point that would be as fathomable as the Dow Jones Industrial being over 1 million points. That, I mean, because of how fast it's doubling every 6 months, 7 months, like nobody can fathom the Dow Jones being at 1 million. Like, think about the celebration that would happen there, right? Like, that is how unfathomable it is of where AI will be in just 3 years. And so it's just there's so much that is happening and so quickly that it's hard to keep up, which will lead to another question. Well, I guess we'll lead to this question: is in your opinion, how do advisors keep up with it?
Yeah. And that's going to be a continuing theme as well, right? There's so much happening, and there's so much optionality too with the different models, right? Each different model has their own strengths and things that they do really, really well. So if you just look at it from a multi-model perspective, GPT is kind of your great everyday co-pilot, right? They've done an incredible job through their partnership with Microsoft to getting tied into that entire Microsoft ecosystem. But then you look at what Google Gemini has done as well in terms of content generation and market commentary, being able to have multimodal capability. So being able to ingest charts and graphs and all the other things to then leverage within the generation of new content, new context. And then you look at things like Claude that are incredible at deep reasoning and analysis, right? They all kind of have their place. But I think the other thing that's really interesting too is when you look at all these different AI native platforms, Matt, you're starting to kind of see an effect that's, in my mind, kind of reminiscent to the dot-com bubble back in the day, where, you have a tool. Let's just take Lovable, for example. That's one that I love to do some rapid prototyping and stuff in. It may cost me $100 a month, but they turn around and they pay $300 to ChatGPT for the credits that are used for that $100 subscription. ChatGPT then turns around and pays AWS or Azure $500 for the hosting, and then Azure turns around and is paying NVIDIA or whoever else for the chips, for the GPUs. And so you're starting to see this unscalable kind of mountain that is occurring right now, and it's going to be really interesting to see what inevitably happens, right? Especially when you look at all the VC dollars and everything else that are pouring into a lot of these companies. It's just not possible that all of them make it. And there's a whole nother kind of conversation around private market investments that make it really scary as well, especially for the unseasoned investor.
Yeah, I just listened to a recent episode of the Daily AI Daily Brief, and they were talking about that, how the the private markets investors are propping up the AI boom. And there's like this argument between two sides of like, this is like a .com, this is not like a .com. And he referenced an example to Uber, where back in the day, like Uber, the cost of Uber was like a lot less because it was being propped up by investor dollars. Like to ride, it was like not as expensive if you looked at some of the data from there. And now it's more expensive. And so there will have to be this time when the user has to, pay the piper, basically. And the cost of Lovable won't be able to be $100 a month. It will be $400 a month. And so, but the problem is that they get you addicted to it, just like Uber, and then you have to pay it. And as these companies become more mature, then they're going to have to start charging more from that standpoint. So I agree. Right now it is, but the difference is that these companies, the difference between .com that I agree with and this is that these companies are actually generating revenue. That is the thing. Like those companies were like not really generating revenue. But these companies are actually generating revenue, which is interesting as well from there, which then leads to agentic agents. And I think that this is the year of agents, it seems like, because it's become so much more prevalent and prominent. I'll set this, and then I want you to I want your opinion on agents and how they play into part. Is I look at it in this framework of AIME, AIME, and that's how I think about AI, right? A stands for automate. That's just like doing robotic process automation, creating some like workflows, etc. Then you have inform, and that's like using LLMs just like to get information. That's like using ChatGPT to get information. And then you have magnify, which is M, which is like using that information to help you make strategic decisions. So how do I go deeper on it to magnify it to get it? And then you have execution. And execution is agents. And I think that there's so few people talking about agents and execution, at least right now in our industry. I think that there's like a small percentage of people, but how do agents fit into this whole new paradigm that we're trying to understand today?
Yeah. The easiest way for most people to think about an agent is just as a digital employee, right? So it comes back to the conversation earlier that we were kind of talking about, where from a data perspective, being able to chunk out your data, right? So whether that's creating individual data marts or whether that is having, well-defined subsets of data, these digital employees need to be narrowly defined in terms of what task they're trying to achieve. But ultimately, you're able to define a goal or a desired outcome, and you're able to have these things work 24/7 on your behalf. And so a lot of what we're doing at Fynancial right now is focusing kind of on the next step, which is something called next best actions. And when we look at what a next best action is, right, from an advisor's perspective, it's what is the next best thing that I can do in my practice today to continue moving conversations forward, right? And it's not just conversations. It may be what's the best thing that I can do for a specific client, for a prospect to get them to convert. But it's all based on the data that we're seeing. And so there's a really strong parallel there. But let's say I have an agent, for example, that is sitting there and it's reading all the change states within a database, and it's saying, okay, hey, this person's got a birthday coming up. They're getting ready to turn 65. What are the different things that I need to be looking at and need to be preparing for in order to get in front of this client, right? Or if you have, let's say you've got a client that has kids that are getting ready to turn 26, right? And they're currently on your client's insurance. Like, these are all different milestones or events that you need to be able to surface insights for, but more importantly, to act and execute. So the agent's kind of role in all of this is doing the work for you based on what they're seeing without you having to do anything. And so this is why earlier in the conversation I was saying, I believe that the end state is going to be advisors spending more time with clients, because these agents are going to be operating in the background doing the work that advisors do today. And so that frees up a ton of time to actually have an immense amount of personalization that, again, just wasn't possible before. And so you look at a lot of these agents as well. These agents can go out, they can scrape the web, they can enrich existing contact data. They can understand what's going on in people's personal or social lives. They can understand what's going on from an employment or kind of career perspective. There's so many different opportunities to use agents. And then the next thing that comes after that is agentic workflows, where the output from one agent then turns around and becomes the input for another. So when you look at that example that we discussed earlier around ingesting financial plans, right? And the reason that you need to chunk those out into sections. So you think about, I've got a section or a chunk for retirement planning. I've got a chunk for insurance, right? You may have the first agent that goes through and it generates all of the insights across your firm for retirement planning specifically. It takes the output of that, it passes it into another agent, and then that next agent's job is to take it a step further to whatever that end goal is. And so I think that's what becomes really interesting going forward, is the advisor is not going to have to do as much work. The back office staff is not going to have to do as much work. And when you talk about how do I provide more value to clients, how do I generate more insights, as they continue, and this is just people in general, as people get used to and adjust to this 24/7, always on kind of environment that we've entered into, and they're expecting to have information instantly, it's extremely important to be able to provide that. And so how do we do that? How do we not only generate insights, but how do we get them to our clients? And this goes back to what we do with Fynancial. So the kind of paradigm that we're working under is it's data, it's delivery, and it's AI. So being able to take the data, act on the data using AI, and then ultimately deliver those insights out to clients.
Yeah. There's two major takeaways I had from that. One is this like new mentality that there is eventually going to be a world where you have human resources and managers of digital agents, where you have to manage digital agents. You have people that their full-time job is to be the manager and the human resources of digital agents to give them what they need. And I was talking about this in a recent podcast as well, where I haven't found, maybe I'm using it wrong, AI to give me more time. What I found is AI to give me an ability to go deeper on my work and I think that is the biggest misconception, that people think that AI is just there to be like the task doer, and it will do a lot of tasks, but what it does also now is it gives us so much more ability to go deeper. Like, on strategic things that I would just usually do and move on, or like I would just like kind of do some research for like an hour or two and move on. Like, now I'm doing it for like weeks or 2 weeks because it's like so fun and so interesting and so much more enlightening and powerful than just getting the answer and going. So that is like, curious on your thoughts on it, is like, that is a difference of opinion of like, you don't just use AI to get the answer. It's like, go deeper behind the answer and you find like much more value and power than like ever before. And it's actually more time. So you need to have leverage to get that ability to have that time for agents to do all that non thinking creative side.
And honestly, I think that just says a lot about you and who you are as a person. I think when you look at the ROI, right, and how people should be planning their budget, right, it's not AI is going to automate anything and I'm going to be sitting on my hands doing nothing, right? It's really in a capacity unlock to where now I have more time to do the deeper, more meaningful work. And so, again, that's still a preference, right? You could stop there where it just does the work for you. But again, that's the opportunity, and that's kind of the segue into how can I create a more personalized experience? How can I go deeper? How can I deliver more value, more service ultimately to my clients?
Yeah. And I think, as we're talking about AI, we're talking about agents, we're talking about, having to have human resources for a digital employee, which I know it sounds funny, but it's going to be real. So you can mark it here is it's going to be happening. I'm curious from your perspective, what common mistakes do you see when advisors or founders try to innovate, but they miss the mark?
It goes back to human-centered design. It truly. So we're kind of coming back full circle here, but ultimately it's understanding, having a deep understanding of the problem that you're trying to solve, and then finding the expertise, if you don't possess it, to deeply understand the process, the problem, the desired goal, the bottlenecks, et cetera, so that you can actually deliver value. So you can deliver a product ultimately that meets the needs. And again, when you're looking at this from a product perspective, you can have a narrowly defined product, right? Because at the end of the day, in order to run a successful business, you have to be able to generate revenue. So you have to be able to solve a problem that is big enough to actually bring in the cash, so to speak, so that you can continue building and continue operating and continue ultimately providing that value. So I think the challenge that a lot of people run into is just not having all the facts up front, not understanding intimately the problem that they're trying to solve, and just saying, hey, I think this is something that AI can do, taking shortcuts, not interviewing prospective clients, not interviewing other advisors in the industry or other founders in the industry to understand how this plays into the broader ecosystem. And then ultimately that prevents them from ever getting traction in the first place.
Patrick, man, we could talk for days. I find you super intriguing. I love what y'all are doing, and you're very insightful. I want to wrap up with two questions, though, and I've kind of changed up a few things here. But what's one experiment you think every advisor could run this month to future proof? Because I have to use that word. It's the name of the podcast. The future proof their firm. What do you think would be one experiment?
Get engaged. The first thing is that there's a lot of people that are kind of waiting on the sidelines right now to see how things evolve. But the problem is that you're missing an opportunity to learn right now. So the same things that hold true now are going to hold true in the future. Understand how to correctly structure a prompt, for example, right? That's something that I think a lot of people overlook. But the better structure, the better instructions, the better context that you're able to provide to the AI, the better output that you're going to get. I think that's the first thing is just don't be scared to dive in. There's a lot of things around compliance that create a lot of hesitancy right now in terms of compliance officers allowing their team or allowing their firm to really embrace and run fast with AI. And rightly so. I mean, I understand all the dangers as well, but if you don't get involved now, you're going to be so far behind in the future.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's just go and learn by doing, right? Just learn by doing. And there's so much out there. That's kind of what I try to do. I just go and play with tools, and I actually record myself being stupid on them and figuring them out. Um, I would ask this last question: who's inspiring you right now, inside or outside the industry? Who's inspiring you and why? I'm interested.
That's a great question. So I look at there's so many different entrepreneurs that I kind of point to and look at and understand and follow really closely. I think more recently, someone that I've really been fascinated with is Dharmesh Shah, one of the founders of HubSpot. I think he's doing some really groundbreaking things with model context protocol. I think some of the stuff that he's doing around agent.com is really fascinating in terms of helping people understand how to better use AI. He's definitely one of the top voices that I follow and engage with. But there's so many different people. It's really about understanding who really knows where the industry is headed and who's helped shaping that.
Patrick, man, really enjoyed this conversation. For all those that want to continue following you and everything that y'all are doing and being one of the trusted people in the industry of what's going on in AI, what's the best way for people to continue to stay in touch and follow you?
Yeah, go check out Fynancial on LinkedIn. You follow me, Patrick B. Parker, on LinkedIn as well. And the thing I kind of want to leave people with today is just, if you look at AI as being the engine and data as the fuel, don't fear, because advisors are still in the driver's seat.
Love that analogy. I think we'll leave it there. Patrick Parker.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt.